introducing yourself and letting us know about the Communist Party of Kenya, the main theoretical aspects, the main struggles that the Communist Party of Kenya is involved in right now. You can start with an introduction.
Yeah, thank you very much, comrade. My name is Buka Ngesa Omole. I am the National Vice Chairperson of the Communist Party of Kenya. And I also double up as the National Organizing Secretary and a member of the Central Committee. What I would like to tell our listener that the Communist Party of Kenya is a product of the struggle. And many poor Kenyans and workers have mattered to fight for this democratic space, to organize politically. And just to help you put it in history, we were only able to call ourselves Communist Party 3 years ago. And that is after a long struggle. So we could not say that the current Communist Party of Kenya is it's the only organizations that have started to advance the struggle of the Kenyan masses. But we are only continuing with a struggle that has been going for many years. A few years ago, up to until 1997, communism was banned in our country. It was, it was seditious. There were seditious laws that banned communism. And at that time, the progressives had to do most of the work covertly. And it was only until 1997 that the progressive joined the Social Democratic Party at that time, because the Social Democratic Party was a legal entity, while any communist organization was targeted by either the neocolonial government here at home and of course their sponsors abroad. So we had the first liberation. We call it the first liberation when the progressives of this country led to the introduction of multi-party democracy. And then after that, we had one long-term dictator that ruled us for 27 years. And that was dictator Moi. So we managed to kick him out in 2002. And then the process of constitutional review started. And this went until 2010 that we had a constitutional review. It's only after that constitutional review that, we could then organize overtly. So we can see that the Communist Party of Kenya participated in the elections covertly under the Social Democratic Party for a long time. And it was only until 2017, 2019 that the Central Committee made a decision that we will change the name to reflect on our political ideology, because we are a Marxist-Leninist party. We are not a reform party. And even though it was legally acceptable to start off that, but even the Kenyan state, rejected that proposal through the registrar of political parties here. And we had to again start the struggle to be allowed to be accepted as the Communist Party of Kenya. And that was a cocktail of array of struggles. We did street demonstrations and finally ended up in the tribunal. And that is how we got to change our name. But for the last 10 years, the Social Democratic Party at that time was purely a Marxist-Leninist party. Only by name, it was Social Democratic Party of Kenya. But in terms of our ideological clarity, in terms of our struggles as a people, we are a Marxist-Leninist party. Now, in terms of other ideological shades that I could probably talk about that converge at the Marxist-Leninist ideology, we are an internationalist organization. So we are in solidarity with the many struggles of the world. We call ourselves the headquarters of the international solidarity here in Kenya. And we're in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Palestine that are against the Zionist regime, in Israel, the apartheid Israel regime. We are in solidarity with the last colony in Africa, Western Sahara. We are in solidarity with the heroic people of Cuba. We are in solidarity with the heroic people of Venezuela, and everywhere that we are in solidarity with the people of West Papua. And every time we make our voices known to that they got friends in this part of the continent, and we continue to highlight their issues. And also we could say that we are a Pan-Africanist organization. And even though we say that we are a Pan-Africanist organization, we see Pan-Africanism as the objective. Software that actually runs Pan-Africanism is scientific socialism, which is based on Marxist-Leninist. And the entire belief, and we continue to rededicate ourselves that for a continental unity, that we want not a united Africa like Europe, but a united Africa under scientific socialism. We want a united Africa and not built on racism, but built on dignity and humanity of a people. So in terms of our ideological clarity, that's what I could let you know. And of course, we have joined many struggles globally and also here at home.
Excellent. I'm really interested in what you mentioned of being an international solidarity organization, and specifically interested in Marxist-Leninism that incorporates Pan-Africanism into it. I'm curious what you think of the problems of neocolonialism in Kenya in particular, but across Africa as a whole. What does the Communist Party of Kenya view as the main threat of neocolonialism today in Kenya? And if you want to talk about especially the current government under Kenyatta, what is the main threat of neocolonialism?
Yeah, in Kenya, we are being dominated by a neocolonial turbo-capitalist system here. It basically means that in our independence, we did not fight for our full independence. We negotiated for independence, and the negotiation took place between the nationalists and the Imperial Britain. And when that negotiation took place in the Manchester Conference, there was a negotiation. And the peasant movement that is prominently known as the Mau Mau, in Kenya here, we know them as the Land Defense Force, were not able to negotiate with the British, the Imperial British, because for them, it was an issue of land. So if you don't give us land, then we have no business to talk about you. But the nationalists, that was led by Jomo Kenyatta, who was the father of the current president that we have, Mr. Kenyatta, the young Kenyatta we have now. They were able to negotiate with the Imperial Britain because they had land. Their circumstance, their material circumstances allowed them to do that negotiation and sell out the fight for liberation. And they signed several pacts to safeguard the Imperial Britain here and their allies. So in that case, we say we had a sham independence. When we talk of a neocolonial capitalist system in Kenya, we mean that, even the people in leadership in this country, they are so weak to completely oppress the Kenyan people. So they have to form alliances of oppressions of the West and our former, colonizer, Britain, to be able to further their oppression and exploitation for the Kenyan people. So they are actually brokers of imperial interest. They are brokers of Western interest. If you look at the way they have turned our economy, it's upside down. They embrace financial and fiscal policies that are proposed to them by the Bretton Woods institutions like World Bank and IMF. So you realize that in 1990s to date, Kenya's economy was turned upside down. We are not internally looking. So you realize that we are reduced into a low, wage earners people, and then we export raw materials that are being, creating jobs elsewhere. So in that way, we see that we are only a market for secondhand clothes, for secondhand everything. If you look at our cars on the road, the clothes we are putting on, we are not manufacturing anything. We are not geared towards any industrialization. What we see in the current leadership is there are a few people which we may term as the national bourgeoisie, but the country has been taken by the comprado because they are only in a negotiating approach with their big bosses in Europe, their big bosses in the United States of America. And when Kenya, I think last election, if you study a bit of what happened, was that the national tribal elites were fighting in this country. And the people who were leading that negotiation was Godek here, who was the ambassador of the United States to Kenya. And they're not leading such negotiations to try and, like put up a sustainable peace in our country, but to take care of certain imperialist interests, which is mainly in extractive sector. We have gold plots here, we have titanium-based resources, we have even flower companies here, which are, if you look at, for example, the Dutch flower farms in Naivasha, they are using difficult chemicals. They are not paying people minimum wages. They are, it's what I will call a modern day slavery in actual sense. And they are given this license to operate in our country without certain rules because they are in a very toxic marriage to suffocate our people with the national leadership. So the duty of the Communist Party of Kenya is to destroy the illusions that the capitalist system in our country has created to divide us among tribe against tribe, ethnic against ethnicity, and bring out the class contradictions that are inherent in any turbo-capitalist system, and then consolidate the workers, consolidate the poor people and the peasants in the political force, and also to tell them that without the political power, they will never be able to attain economic ends, because the many non-governmental organizations that are actually Western oriented are camping in our country, and they're telling people that you can start some enterprise to make money. You can start some small business of selling some small stuff like grains, and then from somehow you can be a millionaire or a billionaire. So in actual sense, they're taking people out of reality, but the circle of poverty still continues. So the biggest task of the Communist Party is to advocate for political literacy, bring the people's, bring the masses back to reality, because in our own analysis, the objective factors of the revolutions are at the highest level possible. So we just need to deal with the subjective factors of the revolution to make people, to build genuine cadres, to build a strong party anchored on the people, and to be able, to inspire hope among the hopeless people that are in our country, and tell them that they can trust in our cause, and this is the cause for the majority of the people. A few years ago, when Barack Obama was the president, there was a lot of I could call it emotions around the Black communities, and even here in Africa. Even though the Communist Party had already held even a much stronger position, that Barack Obama can only act as a black face on the imperialist interests. And that's what we see here. When he came here, he still continued with the George Bush policies. And there was one particular one that was called the AGOA program, where they were implementing the economic processing zone, and they were lying to the Kenyan people that Barack Obama was much concerned about the employment of the young people in our country. But the economic processing zones are exploitation centers. The Kenyan masses go there to work for nothing, And then they have been able to negotiate for the American multinationals and European multinationals to get subsidized water, subsidized electricity, and such kind of things. But at the end of the day, they suck all the foreign exchange from our country, they suck all the cheap labor from our country, and then after that, collect those secondhand items overseas. We popularly call them here as mutumba, to come back and sell them to us as second-class things. So, well, I think the history is on our side, that people can see that the consistency of the Communist Party of Kenya in terms of trying to expose certain international, crime, I could call it crime syndicates between the Kenyan the Kenyan government now. But if I'm to look at the foreign policy, this has been really bad for our country. In fact, for some reason, we have performed so badly in terms of foreign policy that when Mr. Kenyatta came to power, he did a few things, and we thought he overdid himself in terms of foreign policy, because our foreign policy as a country, especially the foreign policy of government, has been wait and see. Remember, Kenya was not very instrumental in terms of fighting the apartheid regime in South Africa. They were not instrumental. In fact, Kenya was being used as a gas station to fuel bombers that were attacking Uganda. But at least in the last 10 years, after the President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy was indicted by an imperialist court, ICC, they decided that to overcome that indictment by the what they saw as the United States and British interference, on their ambition to become the leaders in our country. So you realize that they turned to the east, and started to talk about the ills of the United States foreign policy in Africa, but it was only a lip service. They never did mean it. By the time they were out of the hooks of the ICC, in fact, for a moment, the government of the day embraced the Communist Party of Kenya in 2016, 2017, and some years before that, because we were talking about international the ICC as an imperialist court. So opportunistically, they supported our struggles, that it was only going to last for a short time. We have seen the policy. Now we have the Palestinian embassy here, but if you look at the previous governments, even whether they're in opposition or in government, they still go to pick arms from the apartheid regime in Israel, and that is what their loyalties form. So what I'm trying to put to you, that the regime that continues to dominate us here in our country has no single interest about the majority of the people. Probably you've read about the Pandora Papers, where the Kenyan political leaders are stealing money, and then they stash them away in European banks, what they call tax havens, and they try to convince the local people that we can make wealth here, while they don't even have confidence in the economies that they are running. So they are taking their money away just in case they are overthrown, which is inevitable that they will be overthrown. So they can have a safe flight and enjoy their loot elsewhere. So when the countries of the West lectures about fighting corruption, and they don't talk about the ill-gotten wealth for the African political leaders that are being stashed abroad, it is very hypocritical in our lenses, because if they were serious about fighting corruption in Africa, having not to say that the British introduced corruption, the British multinationals started corrupting our government officials immediately after independence to try and win tenders and compete among themselves. To us, we think that we can only fight certain ills like corruption, poverty, based on a political revolution, a political revolution that is able to bring dignity to our people, will only when the state, the instruments of the state actually is understood not to be neutral, but we inspired to then work for the majority of the people. not for the insignificant minority.
Very well put. And I'm interested in something you touched on and kind of want to bring more into the conversation about the opportunistic appeals to anti-imperialist rhetoric that weren't actually sincere. I'm wondering about the perspective from the Communist Party of Kenya on national liberation struggle, on anti-imperialist struggle, and how to make that a more genuine commitment as part of a communist struggle. How does that apply to nations like Kenya that are still fighting to liberate themselves from their place within the extractive position within the underdeveloped world?
Yeah, Joseph, what we need to understand is that the national liberation struggles were really not a monolithic struggle. They involved certain stratas in the African continent that had, different ends. Not all of them were looking for that after we kick out the colonial government, then we will liberate our people. In fact, the majority of the nationalists that were non-progressive, they were envious of the white man's position. So they wanted to take those positions and continue to dominate their people. And if you look at the negotiations that took place towards independence, the nationalists that were the backward nationalists were able to negotiate themselves for positions and land issues and even plan jobs within the government to advance. But in other areas, in fact, we like to give these examples when we are teaching our people here, that there are countries that after, especially the Asian countries, particularly even China, if we are to talk about it, that after the Japanese imperialism, was defeated there, the colonial power was defeated, but they pursued an independent internal path to develop their economies. But this idea of opportunistic relations during the struggle for national liberation, it's not a new thing, because if you look back, you'll realize that we used to have the so-called non-aligned forces. The non-aligned was, was an opportunist line when they wanted to benefit from the USSR, then we are neutral on issues. When we want to get some arms from the United States, then we are neutral on those issues. But they did not bother to analyze the stratas, because if you look at the struggle for independence, you could see that there were various formations. One of the formations were the nationalist progressives. Then we had the nationalist, retrogressives, and then we had the masses that were always uninformed, and to them they fought for material fight. To them, if they did not have land, they want land. If they did not have grain, they wanted grain. So they fought a fight for survival. But you realize that after the negotiations, there was high-level assassinations of the freedom fighters, especially those that held positions that they will want to advance those paths towards socialism. In our country, we had a few, they did not come out as communists really, but they were very progressive nationalists. We had Bildad Kagia, we had the father of the head of opposition now, he was called Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, and many other people. So since they were not able to negotiate with the colonial imperial Britain, you realize that the people that were in jail, maybe their material conditions were much toughened, so they were willing to negotiate with the colonizers then, and then sell out other, brothers and sisters who are fighting for them in the same struggle. In Kenya, the British tried to make Jaramogi the president, but he refused that, they needed to release Jomo Kenyatta from prison to lead the independent Kenya. But finally, at the end of it, when they negotiated with Jomo, the progressives were crushed. Some of them were jailed and killed. In fact, before the coming of independence, the leader of the national defense, the Land Defense Force, Field Marshal, Dedan Kimathi was hanged in prison. So they were trying to clear any evidence that could probably, inspire the poor people to advance the fight for total liberation. If you look at even in South Africa, after the negotiations were done with, now the late Mandela, we don't blame Mandela for much because of the price he paid for the freedom of his people. But look at the Marxists and the communists that were assassinated. Look at Oliver Tambo. Look at Joe Slovo. Look at Ruth First, who's being bombed in Mozambique. So the people who held good positions that was to advance the struggle of the ordinary people were either assassinated, alienated, or jailed. And people like Kwame Nkrumah, for a fact, was overthrown in few days. But also, if you look at the philosophical debates that were taking place at that time, is that you realize that the European thinkers were very racist in terms of their approach towards Africa. So even the African thinkers that see a lot of sense in terms of Marxism and Leninism, it took them quite a bit of time to prepare themselves to advance their knowledge, to deepen their knowledge of what Marxist-Leninism as a scientific theory is. Because remember, Kwame Nkrumah came up with some, conscientism. And why I was talking about those shades, and it's because every time he read about books on Hegel, he read about books on, on progressive European thinkers, then he came to the conclusion that they were very Eurocentric. So he decided they were looking for something that is more Afrocentric. And you realize Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, as is referred to, the founder of Tanzania, even started African socialism. So the debate of African socialism started as as a way to conform to the public opinion at that time that the racist approach of the European thinkers was not implementable, that Marxist-Leninism was an alien ideology, and now we needed to do a homegrown, ideology to fit the African continent. So it was only a few years later that people like Kwame Nkrumah absolved themselves. I think when they wrote a book, The Class Struggle in Africa, now we had thinkers like Amilcar Cabral that were, had a bit of clarity in terms of class struggle. Now in that aspect, then we could say that that debate ended in Africa. Now nobody talks about African socialism. We take a very strong position that as long as something has been declared scientific, then its implementation could vary from various circumstances and material realities that are facing us in each and every society. But we could not talk about issues to do with African socialism or European socialism or American socialism, but we talk about one universal scientific socialism implemented within the realities of a people like Kenya. So we hope that we could be able to advance. For example, Kenya, we are still talking about the National Democratic Revolution. The Communist Party of Kenya is trying to form alliances to defeat the dictatorship of the rich people here, even before we start our construction towards socialism and communism.
Very interesting. And just from knowing some history about the South African Communist Party, it's a very similar kind of struggle and focus on the national democratic aspect of the revolution. Still, I'm curious about applying that to the modern day, what the Communist Party of Kenya views. Before I move on to the next question, just a last note on that, but what aspects of, whether it's delinking or whether it's an approach targeted at the extractive position within the world system, but how can national liberation today still play a role in a communist struggle, particularly in the underdeveloped world?
Yeah, what we need to know that the dangers that are facing communist movement are more or less unchanged. since the 18th century and now in the 19th and the 21st century. Such dangers remain alive. And we should be very careful when we are forming alliances with any liberation outfits or any progressive ideas. And the Communist Party of Kenya is well aware of that. And some of the dangers that are facing communist parties all along, across the globe, sadly, some of those problems even led to the fall of the USSR, and we have seen even in other socialist experiments deteriorating the processes. And one of them is opportunism. That is something that we continue to deal with in the party quite clearly. The second one is revisionism, because if you try to revise Marxism, to fit positions of privileges of a few people, then we are, diluting the doctrine of the liberation of the masses and trying to accommodate the parasites within the movement. So such things are what we are careful to. But we also know that our revolution is not going to be a straight line. We have each and every stage, we have to isolate the people's enemy and try to fortify, our mass base and inspire anger to the enemy at that time. For example, during the fight for independence, it was easier for the nationalists, it was easier for the comprado and even the national bourgeoisie to cooperate together. Even now, sometimes we join certain campaigns about the national bourgeoisie because they're saying, buy Kenya, build Kenya. In that way, we see that when they start off that rhetoric and they're trying to encourage, local industrialists to advance, to be able to create a market for them here, we see it as important to us, other than the people who just want to auction the county to the biggest buyers. Right. So the most important thing is be wary about revisionism, be wary about opportunism, and then form deliberate alliances to advance the struggle. For example, now, somebody could be wondering, why is a Marxist-Leninist party participating in a bourgeois election? It's like competing with money, and we don't have money to try and run certain processes. But we have to bring clarity that when the masses are with the bourgeois democracy, that is where the masses are. And we do not want to be isolated from the masses. So when there is an election and the political environment is heightened, we must never leave the masses at the mercy of the capitalist politicians. We must seize the moment to do our propaganda and agitation to try and raise the class consciousness of the masses. And even though our chances of performing or of winning power through bourgeois elections are very slim, but at least it helps us to continue our preparation for the subjective factors of our revolution. And also, secondly, is that we are normally very disadvantaged in terms of the media coverage. And even though they do it sometimes, either if we don't force them, then they will want to only highlight the main capitalist political parties. In fact, there's a dangerous rhetoric in our country that we have been able to defeat, that the Kenyan and the people of Africa only need 2 or 3 political parties, like in Britain and in the United States, right, to try and lead a dictatorship of a few capitalist political parties, like we see in the United States, Republican and Democrats, dominating the United States people and lying to them about certain things. And, but everything else, they tell you such a person is a lesser evil to the other. You please, carry out an electoral process. And that was also what the NGOs wanted to import to our country. At least for a moment, we are able to defeat such propaganda and bring reality to the people. So in terms of the national liberation movement, those are liberation movements that are formed for a particular purpose. Right. And then we have to realize that when we are going to those liberation movements, what is it that we are going to achieve? From the Communist Party of Kenya, we see movements that we work with here have clarity of what we want to achieve. For example, the Communist Party of Kenya works with the landless, the movement of the landless.
Mhm.
And when we go there, we are fighting for land. So we don't care from which class strata do you come from. But the unity at that point is, are you fighting for the land of the landless? Then at that time, we are united. When we are talking about things like anti-privatization, there are progressive elements of businessmen that see it that like over privatization of common goods like ports and land is not a good thing for the stability of their country. They might be doing it for their own selfish interest, but at that moment, the Communist Party of Kenya will want to advance an anti-privatization campaign. So we form temporary unities. As long as it is clear for us, if you look at our program in the Communist Party of Kenya, we are very clear. We have a short-term program, we have a minimum program, and we have the maximum program. Mm-hmm. Our minimum program is to continue to defend this democratic space that our brothers and sisters have fought for. We must never allow any of the things that we fought with to be taken away from us. Mm-hmm. We defend the 2010 Constitution with our life because we know that if it's gone, then we don't want to go back to to do underground politics because It is much more difficult there. Then we have our minimum program, which is to take political power by consolidating the stratas of the working class into a political instrument and finally taking the political power. And the minimum and then the maximum program, we will want to start our construction of the new state, not the bourgeoisie states. After the taking over the power, we want to declare, the minimum program and start to lead a dictatorship of the working class to try and get the wealth from the people who stole it and start off the reconstruction of our country. We also will want to get in touch and unify our struggles, both at Pan-African level, which is continental, and also at the global level, because we are much aware that capitalism is global. So if in any way we will want to replace capitalism, then we have to replace a global thing with a global thing. And that is why we talk about international globalization based on friendship, solidarity, and scientific socialism to counter the neoliberal globalization that is being championed by the United States and their Western allies.
That was very well put, and I think it's very interesting that you picked up on the aspects of the national liberation struggle that a lot of people in the West do not kind of focus on, particularly a focus on breaking away from the international globalist capitalist system and trying to assert a position separate from that. That brings me into kind of our next question. A lot of us are curious in the West, especially those of us who are Marxist-Leninist ourselves, about the view from the underdeveloped world on China and increased Chinese investment in Kenya and across the African continent. So I'd be interested to give you some time to talk about that and the CPK's position on that.
Yeah. First of all, we got to get clarity that we have the global South and the global North. Mm-hmm. And for CPK, we were inspired by several speeches of Hugo Chavez in terms of handling that equation of the global South and the global North. Mm-hmm. The people of Africa are safer when we have a multipolar world and not a unipolar world, because it gives them strength in terms of negotiating for continental interest against the big powers who have continued to dominate. Right. So that multipolar world could be imperialist powers, it could be socialist powers but it already gives us a lifeline as the global South. It's important for us to note that. The second thing is the United States hegemony, relies on blackmail of other, other countries, other nations to try and isolate them. And they don't care which project they are doing, whether that project is for the good of their citizens, like in Cuba, or that project is for good of a few people. But as long as that experiment that is being done in that country is not in tandem with what they call the United States interests, then they declare you an enemy. And then they do sanctions, and then they do financial blockades. And then after that, they start their war games by calling, whatever, you're a dictator, you want to dominate your people. And then after the sanctions and the financial blockades, start to suffocate your people with hunger, like we saw in Zimbabwe, we saw in Venezuela, in Cuba. Then they started to bring in money through USAID and other non-governmental organizations to try and finance some right-wing terrorist organizations, like you can see Islamic States. And before you know, they are raining bombs on you because they have continued to win public opinion. They have continued to win the global public opinion that, Bukka is a terrorist. So it's a case of, call the victims the terrorists and then bomb them into subjugation. And then from there, you can advance your hegemony in the world. So if we are to look at it from that perspective, then the Communist Party of Kenya takes a clear stand that we are in favor of a multipolar world. So even if Russia is an upcoming power or any other, we saw the BRICS at that time, I think it was India, it was Brazil. They were trying to form an alternative, financial infrastructure of the globe. And the Communist Party of Kenya is aware that if that succeeds, then some of our worries will have been settled. Now, in terms of the Chinese revolution and the Chinese experiment, first of all, that revolution is very close in our heart as the people of Africa, because we share a lot of similarities with the heroic people of China. The heroic people of China fought against Japanese imperialism. They fought against colonialism. They were able to advance the economy in very amazing way to bring people out of poverty. So we see a lot of similarity between the Chinese Revolution led by Chairman Mao and the African continent. Sometimes we do clear comparisons between India that took a neoliberal path and the Chinese, the heroic people of China that took a different path. We look at Vietnam, we look at Laos, we try to compare them and see what we can learn from them. After saying that, the condition of China is rather too complicated. And we could not say that from the Communist Party of Kenya, we are a specialist. But we know that we cannot criticize China in a very cynical and in a racist way like the West want us to do, because they made us think like, the Chinese goods are, they are substandard before even arriving in our country. They made us think that the Chinese people are racist even before we met them, before we started to interact with them, with the Chinese people. And now there is a global campaign, to sing war drums for China. There is a global campaign even in my country. There are NGOs that are laundering American taxpayers' money to try and spread anti-Chinese propaganda. And we know that even before they started spreading anti-Chinese propaganda, they still say China is successful because it is capitalist and communism is a failure everywhere. So if communism succeeds, then there is nothing it can do. It can only be capitalist. There are certain things that we can criticize as progressives within the Chinese socialist experiment, because we call it an experiment, because even the Chinese themselves have not said they are a communist state or a communist country. They are saying they are working towards communism by the year 2050. Right. But we see when IMF and World Bank were triangulating us, they were killing us in Africa. nobody was there to give us an alternative to negotiate for, receptive loans. The Western NGOs that were organizing, offensive in our country were in deep marriage with the IMF and World Bank, and they made us now we are even experiencing austerity measures in terms of fuel. They made us to close our industries, and that silly campaign of less, more business, less government led to a lot of retrenchment. So we don't see any sympathy from the West, or we don't want to take their advice on how we should relate to our brothers and sisters in China. We will want to appreciate that the coming of China or Chinese capital in Africa has seen tremendous, improvement in terms of African relations with the West. At least now, when President Obama came in our country, he was able to negotiate with our president. We have seen the arrogance of the ambassadors of the West reducing in our country because they know China is a competing power. So China has given us, a leave to negotiate in terms of loans. And we have also been keen to study things that are happening in China. They tell us, they try to play some propaganda videos about human rights, issues to do with China. They try to bring issues of Taiwan. They try to bring issues, the pro-democracy protests that are taking place there. But in our country, we know that we are not even living in a democracy. We are living in a dictatorship of, an insignificant rich people. We know our brothers and sisters in the United States are living in capitalist dictatorship. It is not that they are enjoying democracy. And in terms of human rights violation, what if we start to have debates about Guantanamo Bay? What about if we have debates about the United States coming to our country to influence anti-terrorist acts and bills, to bribe our members of parliament to pass certain bills to be able to kill people that they don't like, particularly the Muslim clerics, the communists that are organizing. They are arrested and are jailed on trumped-up charges and are shipped in body bags to the United States. They are not telling us that. So the United States and their Western allies that colonized us here have no moral ground to lecture us about how we are going to relate with our Chinese brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. So we see the historical experience of the CPC as something really to learn from. Even with their own weaknesses, we have seen that the Chinese people, if we are to call them an imperialist power, it will be the most reactionary thing. Because if you look at our loan book in Africa, even though the Western multinationals and the media, I call them the lie factories, the BBC, the CNN, that are meant to brainwash the African people, even though they're saying that we are taking a lot of loans from China. But if you look at the Kenyan loan book, the Paris Club is giving us loans, IMF is giving us loans, World Bank is giving us loans with conditionalities. And the Chinese, our loan book in terms of the Chinese was in fact, it was not even 25% the last time we were having these debates. So we don't want to run scared with the illusions about Chinese imperialism. In fact, imperialism as we know it, first of all, they just don't dominate a people. They finance, a people they financed war. They dominate a people through oppressive and repressive force. And Chinese have been very clear. In fact, we would have liked the CPC to support the Communist Party of Kenya. We are yet to have a relationship with them, but they have a policy of non-interference. They do not want to interfere with the internal affairs of the Kenyan people. Right. But we don't take it, as offensive to our organization. We know that when the Communist Party of China were organizing their revolution, the USSR financed both the CPC and also they were having a relationship with the government of the day in China at that time. And we don't want to hold the CPC, because international solidarity is not an act of charity. It is not something that we demand from the people. It is, we also don't need anybody to empathize or to sympathize with our situation here. If the best thing that the people in the United States or the people in Europe can help us to do is that they can hold their governments responsible, that they should be able to put more pressure for their government to stop spending money, you know, in financing war, in bombs, and financing, you know, a military complex. So they cannot provide food, they cannot provide education, they could not provide quality healthcare for their people. Now, if that pressure is there from home, that will be good for us in Africa, because then we will be free to organize our own affairs without undue interference or limited interference from the Western governments. So we continue to pursue knowledge. We continue to humble ourselves to understand the situations in China, but we would like to be critical about the Chinese people based on knowledge, not based on propaganda influence and anti-Chinese propaganda being spread mainly by, you know, the media factories that operate in that part of the world.
Mm-hmm. That was incredibly well put. I'm curious about, on that note of the propaganda that has come from the West about the rise of China. I think the answer may be somewhat obvious, but I'm curious about your perspective about why the US in particular, but the West in general, seem so terrified of the rise of China and fear it, and thus have to propagandize against it to such a high degree. What does the rise of a multipolar world, in your opinion, you talked about negotiations, but in particular thinking about the defense policy of the United States as it pertains to using Kenya as a base for military operations, how do you see the rise of China in a multipolar world threatening that American and Western hegemony in Kenya?
What I would say that the United States want to be a big boy, so they do not want to accept anyone who want to pursue. They don't care about right to self-determination of a people. Mm-hmm. And one thing that scares them, you know, to hell is any successful story about socialism, because they have published all sorts of, you know, nonsense, all sorts of propaganda against any socialist experiment that has ever been carried out. And to them, getting people of poverty is not a priority to them. They have continued to dominate this continent. They have continued to dominate the world affairs based on, you know, I could say raw lies and illusions. Mm-hmm. And they want to continue to brainwash the people of the United States to continue to scare them that they are taking care of their security interest, while we know that they are not taking care of the security interest of the United States people. In fact, they are setting the people of the United States against the rest of the world. They are spreading hatred, you know, for the people that are actually loving and are determined to advance in life. So any successful story has of socialism is a scare, you know. I think you understand the Red Scare. It was quite something in your country. Mm-hmm. And even if you go back, Cuba has made tremendous, you know, progress in terms of biotechnology, in terms of medicine, mm-hmm. in terms of creating of a new human being who, you know, who respects his neighbors, who respect, you know, others regardless of where they come from. They have made the tremendous progress in terms of handling issues to do with racism. Mm-hmm. And China has also advanced, you know, a lot in terms of development. In mm-hmm. fact, there is no reason now. They have run out of lies, because if you're talking about Chinese technology coming to our country, now everybody's looking for China because people believe their quality. Even me, who previously worked in the engineering sector, we see Chinese technology as an alternative, and they are open to negotiations in terms of technology transfer. in the United States and their multinationals, if you talk about technology transfer to your people, they will tell you keep the job. So there is a lot of concerns on the rising of China, and I think it scares them because they cannot see themselves having all these embassies that they have built becoming museums in the next few years. They cannot see themselves being able to blackmail anyone, because in Kenya, for example, where they used to walk in and blackmail anyone, it has been difficult for them, because if you cannot give us this, we will talk to our brothers and sisters in China and see if they can be able to give us a better deal than you. So you try and be a good person, and we can try to work with you. But, and also, I think the American foreign policy, and this you could be much more knowledgeable about it than me. But from where we sit, we see the American foreign policy is to try and also condition, to brainwash the American masses completely, to buy on their propaganda, to buy on their rhetoric. And in that way, they will be able to dominate that country for a very long time before any uprising comes about. They have been hiding against, the Black's eruptions that has been with the United States for a long time. They have been doing crackdowns on the organizations that are doing communist canvassing. They have been trying to infiltrate our education system to put anti-communist propaganda. We have many evangelicals, extreme evangelicals from the United States that are opening big churches in our country. They are opening universities. Some of those things that they teach in the departments of philosophy, they will never even try to escape them in the syllabus in the Europe, because if you start a philosophy class by talking about how God created this world, then you can just be obviously a silly person, because there is nothing that you can try to debate from that false assumption that we are not part of nature. So in many ways, their desperation to keep the American masses almost inactive and try to dominate the rest of the world. They would like to put a puppet in China. They would like to put a puppet in Cuba. They would like to put a puppet in every other country. But sometimes we pause and ask ourselves, where has there been success where the American government has had their puppets? Look at, for example, Venezuela before Hugo Chavez came to be. In as much as now they want us to believe that Venezuela is the hell on earth, it basically is, because they have continued to interfere with oil prices so that they don't get foreign currency. They continue to ban them to import even a little, technology to repair the equipment that they supplied for a fee. The Philips actually supplied these items for a fee. Why are they not supplying parts for it while the Venezuelan people paid for them? So we don't care about the United States being scared about China. What we want to do is we want to make this world a peaceful place to be. We want our brothers and sisters in the United States to know that they have people who love them unconditionally and will want to advance their struggle in a more honest way. And even the whole rhetoric around here is not against the United States of people, but is against a government that is alienated, not just from their people, but a government that is being run by billionaires. Before you ask me about China, we've been receiving very good news how the Chinese now is dealing with the billionaire club. And they're not even allowing them an inch to power, while the United States is being run by, lobby groups. People like Donald Trump may never make it, to power in China. So what we are trying to put across that the concerns about the United States are the concerns of a dying empire. Every empire who starts to finance war, who starts to inspire hatred, who does not consider the interest of their people and want to do a lot of investment in terms of brainwashing and conditioning masses is an empire that is on its way down. And they should know that in the history of the modern world, people just want to live in peace. People want to live in, to live and sustain this world. We want to progress as humanity. We want to live in joy. In fact, we are not in the fight because we love to fight. No, we just want to live with dignity. We also like to dance and take some beer and celebrate our life in the best way we can. We are not dogs or animals who just want to fight. But now if we don't fight, then we will be selling an entire generation.
Right.
Yeah.
Incredibly well put. I think another interesting thing for me too is that when you were discussing Venezuela and Cuba, the US level of propaganda, I think, and it also applies to Kenya, this need for interventionism, this need to meddle in the affairs of other countries. One of the reasons I think for the US policy in East Africa and continuing to conduct war and have a US military presence in East Africa is this brainwashing of the US population to convince us that we have to be the world policeman, we have to conduct military for the entire world and be involved in every other country's foreign affairs. And as we know, it's all part of a policy of control to ensure that the US military is really in control in all of these countries. And Venezuela, Cuba, China, I think, are great examples of countries that have been able to resist that. But that kind of brings me to another topic, which is knowing that that is the policy of the United States. We have many concerns, myself and other American, people who identify as communist, concerns of the more reform-minded left opposition, whether they be social democratic, democratic socialist, who try to continue American foreign policy and don't believe in anti-imperialism as a key part of their socialism. That's a concern for me. I'm particularly concerned about Western left-wing parties that don't put anti-imperialist policy, non-interventionist policy, trying to destroy the American empire at the key part of their program. So I'm curious your view from Kenya, and also from the part of the world that is suffering from continued American imperial hegemony, on those parties in the West, the more reform-minded parties that don't believe in fundamentally destroying the American empire and the Western military hegemony, and are in some ways complicit in maintaining it, and your view on those parties and whether they can ever truly be true friends for the liberation struggle in the third world.
Now, you mentioned about the military bases,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't take it for granted that the United States of America and French continue to have heightened military operations in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, other than the military bases, they are even plugging our military system with their military system. So they are infiltrating our military infrastructure, our military, we don't have a secret, we don't have security secrets anymore, because we have to consult the United States, we have to consult the Mossad of Israel, we have to consult the French. And in that note, we are happy what is happening in Western Africa. At least the Western Africa is rising against French imperialism, which has taken place there in a long time. In Africa, particularly in Kenya, it will shock you that the British still have a base in our country. They have one of the biggest bases. In fact, we even now estimated that the number of the British soldiers we have on our country could be able to take over our country with very minimal fight, because we off them at the Nanyuki Air Base, and they have been continuing to. Last year, they have only been able to inspire hatred and anger because of the silly things they have done in Nanyuki. and they have continued to conduct rape. They have continued to be reckless with their bomb experiments, leading to the killing of the people. The United States of America also have the murder base here in Lamu, but they have their way in government. Previously, before Mr. Kenyatta came to power, we had another president called Kibaki, and he was very categorical that the United States will not have a base here. But now they use these anti-terrorist laws and blackmail to ensure that sometimes they even donate some weapons to our military. And in return, they try to say, we want to train you on anti-terrorist policies. We will want to take care of your defense budget. And in that way, they end up to negotiate with the government today. But the Communist Party of Kenya continue to highlight the dangers of such experiments and how they compromise on our independence as a country, and why we should be able to overthrow the neo-colonial government that continues to dominate us here at home, to be able to start a people's process. So the Communist Party of Kenya takes a clear stand that we do not need any military or war games in Africa. In fact, the African-American experiment has been deeply rejected among the progressives. The second part, which is the most interesting that you've asked me, is the position of the left-wing political parties in Europe or in the United States that are pro-reforms. And this is historical. If you look at the first reform country that started the Reform Party, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, and the differences that they had with the Luxembourg, the Rosa Luxemburg there. The debates have not changed much, but one clear thing that I will want to probably mention is that when the European powers or the great powers, when they were extracting a lot from their colonies, they had surplus to sustain the working class in their countries. So the working class in Europe had always had a quality life, they were highly cultured, and they didn't see the striking disparities between the contradictions between the bourgeoisie and the working class in Europe. Their pay were okay, their medical system was okay. So in that way, the amount of theft that can take place in the former colonies has since reduced tremendously. And you can see that in France. You can see the level of riots and demonstration that is taking place in Paris at the moment, because they are used to certain life, but they did not know that the amount of money, the amount of wealth that was being robbed from West Africa sustained that economy. And now the Macrons and the leaders of the French government cannot sustain that quality life. So they are experiencing pressure from the working class. And the working class contradictions with the capitalist in that country are going to be even sharper in the coming days when the crisis in West Africa continues to grow. The second thing is that when we are talking about reforms and reform parties, it is a product of trying to revise Marxism. It's trying to tell us that we can coexist with the oppressor and the oppressed, that we can coexist, as poor people and rich people staying together without the poor having to kill the rich. That is basically what they are telling us. In fact, in Africa, it has even been vulgarized in even the worst ways possible, because they use prosperity gospel to tell the poor people in Africa that there is a paradise in heaven, that you will inherit it, and the rich people have no future in heaven. So you can continue to suffer here on earth while you will enjoy an eternal peace in heaven. And that is the propaganda of metaphysics that is anchored on the philosophy of idealism, to try and promise people things that are only in their head, that do not have extramental reality. But having said that, the environment or the circumstances in which the Europeans or the United States citizens are organizing are even much diverse and are different from ours. They are living with the oppressor in the same room. It's highly financed. In fact, the CIA always try to penetrate they try to penetrate progressive or revolutionary organization in Africa through another revolutionary organization in the United States.
Right.
So you remember they actually implant their intelligence among those so-called progressives. When I was reading Ashata Shakur's book, it was intriguing how at one moment he was having a meeting that was meant to be a party meeting, and 50% of the attendants of that meeting were actually CIA trained. So you can see how dangerous the progressives there are organizing. So they are facing diverse challenges organizing at home. But the reform agenda also needs to deal with the class character of where people are organizing. If you have, for example, in the Communist Party of Kenya, we are deliberate. We have taken a step and a party policy that at no point our party will have less than 70% of the working class. Now, if you look at the leadership in the parties of the West and the United States, they are really from the petty bourgeoisie tendencies, from the intelligentsias. They are lecturers, they are students. They do not face the repression of the regime. So if you have certain certain people like that, then other than their theoretical knowledge about the class contradictions, they do not have a class experience about them. So to try and bring out a campaign, what every time we call in our party the rectification campaign, is to try and bring back reality into the party by recruiting more members from the working class and making sure that even in the party leadership, we have members of the working class that have nothing to make a deal with the bourgeoisie, because to them it is a fight between life and death. So if I negotiate with them, the benefit of the capitalist depends on how much money he continues to take from me. So either I surrender and accept that I will be subjugated for my entire generation, or I should fight first. So the big problem, if you have members of the intelligentsia or the petty bourgeoisie or the bourgeoisie leading a party of the proletariat or a party of the new type, they try to secure their positions of privileges, and they cannot imagine that after the revolution, those positions of the privileges will be non-existent. So they try to create positions of privileges for themselves while leading the proletariat party. Now, when they do that, they fall into the Marxist era and they fall into revisionism, and they try to take compromises with the leadership of the day. When they do that, then they start to lose the support of the working class, because the working class now sees their era and start to call them sellouts. Because when such progressives, revisionist parties get into a relationship with the bourgeois political parties, they get goodies in return. They get cars in return. They get houses in returns. And if they are even incorporated in the government, they get plum positions. And you can see that in South Africa, for example. We have a tripartite being led by South African Communist Party and as the vanguard, and we have ANC, and we have COSATU, which is the workers. There is a lot of pressure from COSATU sometimes to check the South African Communist Party, but the top leadership of the South African Communist Party of Kenya, some of them, South African party, are in government. They are not in a hurry to effect the revolution. So they are in a comfort zone. So a few years ago, we were saddened when there was a breakaway to form the Revolutionary Socialist Workers Party in South Africa. But we can understand their frustration.
Yeah.
So I think that in the countries of the West or the United States, such organizations, progressive organizations, and also parties should be deliberate about organizing the members of the working class. Then they will see less opportunism, they will see less revisionism, and also to try and learn from history. social democratic organizations already sold out the working class. They supported the world wars, at one point. What they were calling if we talk about the second and a half and the second international, that made Lenin start the third international, was because the second and the second half international was supporting colonialism. They were supporting, imperialist wars. And in that way, they already sold the working class. And we know that the contradictions that are between the people who work and the people who take the proceeds of work, the capitalists and the workers, they are irreconcilable. To try and reconcile such a process is to dominate, to try and subjugate and dominate the poor workers.
I can't agree more. I think one of the biggest problems we face is that a lot of these reform-minded parties that do still exist are repeating the error of the Second International by supporting American imperialist policy worldwide, supporting American propaganda, and sometimes even repeating it. So I think it's very frustrating to see that, and it leaves a lot of communists who are in the West to think about what kind of organization, what kind of action we can do to support the struggle in the third world as well, to commit to an anti-imperialist struggle as well as a communist struggle, and not to play into supporting the enriched labor aristocracy in the West at the expense of the working class and the proletariat of the third world. It leads me to a question, I think, of two fronts, I suppose. And the first is your horizon and your perspective on the future of communism across all of Africa and the potential for success and breakthrough, and also your perspective just generally in the globe itself and how the struggle in the third world, particularly across the African continent, can play a great role in, with that success, ultimately pushing and driving the rest of the world and pushing revolution in the West as well. So I'm curious about your perspective on that, the future of the movement in the African continent and how that affects the revolutions across the world.
Yeah, if I'm to think of the future is based on reality. The future is not based on illusions. The future is not based on, it has to be based on truth, which is the congruence of what we think and what is in reality. Mm-hmm. So the question we can ask ourselves, is communist movement on reality or in illusions? Are we on absurdity or we are on reality? I will say emphatically that the communist movements, especially those that sticks to the Marxist-Leninist school of thought, know that the future of mankind is scientific. Mm-hmm. So is the ideology that anchors neoliberalism, the ideology that anchors capitalism, where people, are left at the service of unseen market forces, are they anchored on reality? When people, in fact, talk about the powers that are given from above, are they in reality? In my opinion, of course, my informed opinion is that the future of the communist movement is even much better because it is based on reality. It's based on science. It's based on truth. The second thing I will want to say is that if we look at during the USSR and the United States antagonism, communism was being brought to the people. The USSR was championing the spread of communism. They were trying to integrate brotherhood and sisterhood on the people who were struggling. But even after the fall of the USSR or the socialist blocs, it was declared that communism has ended. In fact, there are two historical essays that I like to read. They are written by two different people, but talking about the same thing. One is the fallen comrade Joe Slovo. He wrote has socialism failed? And when he was writing that, Kim Il-sung in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea wrote again another similar one: attacks on socialism are intolerable. And you could see some congruence in those two documents. People who have never met, but they're reflecting on the same future of socialism. So the question you've asked me, has been with us from 1994, from 1990s. And people have been asking, do we have a future of communism? So it's different, because in the Communist Party of Kenya, we are working bare minimum. We don't have as many resources. We are organizing our struggles in some of the most extreme, difficult conditions. But we are seeing people coming towards communism. We are not seeing people being persuaded, because they know that if a communism is at the helm of the struggle, then it will not sell out. So we are winning the masses in that. If we are fighting for the landless, then we will not stop until the land is given.
Right.
If we are fighting for some judicial processes, we will not negotiate with the oppressor out of court. So we have continued to see that actually communism is attracting masses. Of course, we are also attracting hatred in similar mechanisms. But the people who hate us, I think we don't have any much reason to care, because the hate is actually mutual, because we are organizing to overthrow them. So if they want to spread lies against us, if they want to set the public anger against us, if they want to spread anti-communism propaganda, we just don't care, because when communism reaches the masses, when they reaches the peasants, when they reaches the working class, then it becomes a true force. So in that way, then we see that the future of the communist movement in Kenya, the future of the communist movement of the globe, it only has taken a stride in history, that at times there is progress, and then at times there is retrogression. And retrogression is when we have leadership or political parties that want to take back the gains of communism. And we hope that that will not happen in China. We hope that that will not happen in Cuba. We hope that the struggle for liberation of Venezuela will continue. We hope that all communist parties across the globe will continue to educate themselves and have more knowledge in terms of penetrating true reality and then advancing their struggle. And the third thing that is most important, because I think that does not just touch on communism or communists, but it also touches us ordinary people. Because the whole world, in fact, the criticism of capitalism has since ended. Everybody is talking about what will replace global capitalism, what will replace it. So the most clear ideological school that has challenged capitalism and has had a few experiments done is communism. So what is the alternative? I know we have had some writings from the Pope talking about Catholic social thought, which is also a bit of, it's just a reform agenda. The Pope in his head want to reconcile the thieves and the workers. He want to reconcile, if I even use biblical terms, he wants to reconcile evil and, it's like trying like a child to mix water and fire and thinking that the end result will be fire water and it will be a good cocktail. No. So we have seen, and that is what the social democratic parties are doing. We have seen certain experiments in the Scandinavian countries about welfareism, state welfareism, but such experiments have not been able to eliminate exploitation and oppression by man on man. So the discussion on what to replace capitalism, what to replace imperialism, is even heightened within the bourgeoisie themselves, because to them, they are searching for solutions that allows them to have positions of privileges. So they will never find such a solutions within the bourgeoisie framework, within the capitalist framework, because they only see an alternative that can continue to dominate. And they have taken a few experiments at the global level, and they're running out of options. One of the experiments that they have taken, of course, is the corporates trying to put up what they call excess money into corporate social responsibility and trying to limit uprising and the murder of those corporates in where they are doing their businesses. So that has also just been able to delay the revolution. They have continued, to continue to preach peace through evangelical and Christian movements to try and tell people that we can coexist peacefully in this God-given planet. But then you can only preach that so far. When people are burying their loved one that have died of curable diseases, no amount of such delusions will prevent them from acting. And also now the main experiments that they have done in both Latin America and in Africa is the NGO experiments and what they are calling the campaign on free enterprise. They are giving money, on loans to get more money from the poor people. And they are saying that in that way, we can delay the process of our overthrow. Such desperate attempts were done by the feudal lords. Such desperate attempts were done with the slave masters. But what is inevitable is that communism shall win because we are anchored on truth. We are anchored on reality. We fight, and the only people that are willing to sacrifice their life, to sacrifice themselves for the entire struggle, is on the communist side. And that is not, the rich people are not willing to pay any price for their struggle. In fact, they want to move out their wealth, and if it is possible to buy some land in the moon or somewhere else that they can stay and still continue to extract, the wealth of the people in the world, they want to do that. But the communists, the revolutionaries, are willing to pay the ultimate price. We are willing to martyr, fighting for, in fact, we say the only cause worth sacrificing oneself is the cause for the working class. And that to me guarantee our win and the future of the communist movement.
Very, very well put. I wanted to agree with something you said there about the problem of the Nordic experiments, the social democracy experiments that are so frequently touted in the West as a great example of what socialism can look like. And as you put it very well, saying that they have not eliminated exploitation of man by man. They have not eliminated exploitation of the first world by the third. So they're not really a model to look towards and try to emulate within the rest of the West or within the rest of the world. I just have two, I guess, final questions. My first is if you can talk a little bit more about the CPK's efforts to organize for communist parties across the African continent. So I'm thinking of the CPK's involvement in the ALNEF, the Africa Left Networking Forum. So if you can talk a little bit about that and kind of what that poses as a potential way to create a new supranational organization of communist parties across Africa.
Yeah, I think on that, I would say that the communist tendency is that we will go to fight where the win is possible. And if the win is possible now in Sudan, the communists in Kenya will be in Sudan to fight in the war front with our brothers and sisters there. And taking that tendency in communism, we were convened by the South African Communist Party, which is the oldest communist party in the continent, under ALNEF. But in the greater part of the Eastern Africa, we have seen that the Communist Party of Kenya continued to build stronger relations with the Communist Party of Rwanda. Rwanda is a very unfortunate country, where a few people masqueraded as revolutionary, and now they have jailed revolutionaries, the true revolutionaries there. They have kicked them out, and in fact, the Rwandese Communist Party of Kenya is busy organizing in the refugee camp. and there is an illusion of peace in a country that has many fronts of armed organizations. Rwanda is the biggest jailer of communists, of any, prisoners of conscience. So we are in sympathetic with the Rwandese people, but we continue to associate with the Communist Party of Rwanda in exile. In fact, in many ways, they were exiled here until the Kenyan state opened, he gave Kagame a license to kill the Hutu refugees, the Hutu political refugees in Nairobi. And now they moved to Congo and Kampala. Then we have the Communist Party of Congo that is at least have a smaller liberated zone, and they're continuing to advance their struggle there. So we are in good, warm relationships with them, and they are part of the ALNEF debate. Then we have the instruments, you've seen Mali, for example. Omar Mariko remains in jail, who was leading the left there. But at least there has been coups and counter coups taking place there, organized both by progressives and reactionaries, which to us we see as an interesting occurrence to challenge the domination of the French imperialism there. But we are also working with them. You go back to Sudan. Sudan is the most successful story that we've ever related with it. For a long time, the Sudanese communists found refuge here in underground camps for their communist brotherhood here in Kenya. But they were only able to advance their revolution, albeit even halfly in Sudan. But again, we've seen Riyadh and Israel coming in to try and stop that revolution from being completed. Unfortunately, in Ethiopia, the communists, they are only acting individually. We don't have a communist party in Ethiopia. The ruling party in Eritrea has communist tendencies, but we are happy with the peace that took place in Ethiopia with Eritrea. But also it was able to bring an interesting contradiction that if you continue to sustain peace through tribal or clan alliances, and trying to exchange leadership from one clan to the other, thinking that that would be stable, it is a big debacle in Ethiopia. So you go to Morocco, we have a few left-wing movements there fighting against, the Morocco king. And most of them, especially are residents in Tindouf, where the people of Western Sahara are fighting against the colonization of their country by Morocco. It's a sad case that the United States sides with Morocco in such a process just because they will want to exploit sulfate and other minerals, and it's the same case. It has a lot of similarities, comrade, if you look at it between the decolonization process of Western Sahara and how the British just gave Israel the land of Palestine, and they're saying the one which they didn't have. Now you listen to the Morocco king and you feel just angry because he's saying the territory of the Western was given to them by the Spanish people, who was an occupier. So in that sense, we relate with Polisario as a front for liberation in Africa. And of course, you have read and seen on various media the processes that are now taking place in Swaziland, the monarch in Africa. And the Communist Party of Swaziland has been in the forefront in terms of advancing that struggle against the monarch system in Swaziland. So in terms of the future of the left in Africa, first of all, the left in Africa is struggling. Yeah, they're always underfunded. They cannot even, some of them cannot even organize in terms of Communist Party of Kenya. At least we will be able to push the struggle to certain ends because of cross sections of our population still belong to the working class. But if you have people that do not have any meaningful earning, even to contribute to the party becomes a problem because they cannot feed themselves. So you'll
Right.
find that the left political parties in Africa are struggling. But our duty is to inspire them and tell them that they are on the right side of history. So they have to continue fighting. They cannot lose grounds, because when I read books like the books on Mau Mau from Within, and see the situations that our freedom fighters were fighting for, they were so extreme. And we can not say that just because we have almost nothing, we cannot continue to challenge the imperialist forces in Africa. At least we could learn that if we can continue to talk to the masses, to educate them, then there could be a chance that the left political movement in Africa will continue. Apparently in East Africa, we had a lot to learn from Julius Nyerere's socialist experiment. His party is still in power, but they have diluted the entire framework of that revolution. They have continued to implement neoliberal policies in Tanzania. Even after the late dictator died, the current president still continued to advance, policies that are against organizing. And we still have so many comrades that are in jails in Zanzibar, that are in jail in Dar es Salaam. So in terms of organizing, as ALNEF, we take the Pan-Africanist stand that the total liberation of African people and African continent, wherever they found themselves, can only be, we do not have a privilege to, not a privilege, but we do not want to or wish to colonize other people for our own good. So we can only lead a liberation for everyone, not for ourselves. So we can, if we build a continent under scientific socialism, then we advance a global arrangement under scientific socialism. Then contradictions in terms of racism, contradictions in terms of ethnicity, contradictions in terms of religious are much tertiary as compared to the contradictions that take place within the social, the system of social production. A few hours ago, I was addressing a press conference here in Nairobi, and they were asking me, Buka, you have been fighting against tribalism, of setting one tribe against the other. What is the moral value of the class contradictions? Why are you setting the poor against the rich? And I was telling them that no, the disparities between tribes or disparities between ethnicities or racism are not based on any reality. In fact, they are based on illusions in people's head to try and dominate a people. But class contradictions is a reality. It is anchored on the social relations, and you can see how the rich manipulate systems to continue to dominate. So to talk about the poor people having power for the first time do not actually amount to any immorality. The rich people have had it for 60, 70 years, and we are not willing to let them have it only for domination, because their power is for the insignificant minority. So in terms of the prospects of organizing the left in Africa, it's difficult. The main source of funding for the party is being criminalized. Like, for example, in Kenya, the Communist Party of Kenya cannot be got any solidarity fund from anywhere else, because the government do not, want them to do so. Secondly, the kind of work that people are involved in, they are mainly living in Nairobi. If you check the data now, 60% of Nairobi people live like animals in slum areas with no food, no running water. They are living with sick mothers and children in their houses. How will you even have the morality to tell them to contribute money for the party? So the best they probably will give you is drinking water and food when you're organizing in their areas. So I will tell you that we have a difficult task ahead, but we are prepared for it. We have the power to sustain, the fortitude to and the courage to stay the course.
Mhm. Absolutely, and you know, we believe that as communists, we do believe that it's inevitable, but there's so much to be done to push towards that. That inevitability is never truly inevitable unless there's a fight and a struggle to get us as close as possible across the world. So, very appreciate your answer and appreciate your struggle. Our very last question that I wanted to talk to you about was something you had sent to me, something that I had seen a lot on social media that actually was able to kind of break its way through to what a Western audience was an incredible video put out by the Communist Party of Kenya that showed how the CPK is using hip hop and music to connect to the youth of Kenya and to organize the youth. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to talk about that and how the CPK views this as a way to organize the youth, to get in touch with the youth of Kenya, and even why it's important to organize and talk to the youth.
Yeah, there is a history to it, comrade. In fact, the struggle in Kenya has always been sustained by songs. In fact, I was a young man. The only thing we knew was to, wake up and sing in the name of the revolution and mention the people who have died before us, and to remind ourselves that we will not hesitate to, to sacrifice ourselves, defend those gains that they have, fought for. So we have had songs, but it has been very difficult to produce them, to record them. So 2 years ago, we started the Album 1 and Album 2 projects, in which we did voice recordings. And most of those songs are progressive songs that we have sung underground. We have sung them overground. We have sung them in our study circles, but they were in our oral library. They were not, they were not written. So we started the process to document the struggle of the Kenyan people through songs 2 years ago. And we have done about 18 songs. We did audios for that, which we recorded. But in the course of doing this, we were recruiting young people in the party. And young people, you don't expect them to sing the same songs you sang, when you're growing up. So we have seen a lot of creativity from the Young Communist League. They are coming up with their song that resonates with their struggles. And hip hop has become, a big thing for the Young Communist League that are organizing. So sometimes they say that when they go to talk to people about struggles, it is a painful experience. But when they start to sing about it, when they start to rap about it, then the message is clearer to them. They end up the meetings in high morale. So a few months ago, we decided to do an experiment of now starting to produce the songs that they sing in their organizing. And we started it in the western part of the country, and we tried to shoot a few with our mobile phones and tried to see if we can inspire. The idea was if we can inspire the other people who are organizing in areas of the country to try and come with songs to advance our message among the masses. But surprisingly, we got a huge international following based on such a video. But we hope that, in fact, that international audience has been able to inspire the young people in the party. And they're taking the tasks more seriously. They are taking the task to write the songs. And they are hoping that even though they are still crippled in many ways, but they can produce a proper song. Because you can see that people have been asking, send us the real song, but we are trying to still put the songs together and see if we can have a professional to shoot the video and drop it out before the the launch. We know that we are going to have our campaigns in August 9th, and we have a real chance to, for the first time, to win elections. We have won elections before, but on the lower houses. In 2017, we won a few, but we know that we only win in the working class areas. We only win in mining areas. We only win in landless places. So we concentrate to do that. And it is important to us to win an election because it makes people like you also know that we exist. It also helps us to get to bring out certain contradictions that happen within the capitalist democracy. So we hope that we could continue to do more songs. And I think songs are a product of the struggle. I see most young people, they write the lyrics on the move when they're organizing. Sometimes now I see even children writing them at the back of their exercise books and trying to sing along to them. So I think it is a great inspiration for the comrades that have been in the party for a long time, like me, and also the younger comrades find a voice, and we allow them to express themselves, their anger, their happiness in the best way they can. We do not want them to learn by rote like they want us to do, but we will want them to give them a frame of mind that they can think on their own, they can make proper judgment on their own, so long as it remains fidelity to the proletariat revolution.
Excellent, and I'm looking forward to seeing more songs, seeing it. It was incredible to see it on social media and to see the international attention that it brought to the Communist Party of Kenya. And I think that helps to promote the message, especially to a Western audience that in many ways, as we've been talking about, needs to see that the struggle is continuing in the global South, and in many ways is the most effective and the most important that's happening in the global South. So, and then as you said too, getting the youth organized, getting the youth inspired, particularly using social media that many young people all over the world are connecting through now, I think is an incredible way to continue the struggle. It's an incredible innovation that hopefully more parties throughout the world will pick up on, and hopefully will provide a lot of success to the movement and the revolution in Kenya. So I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to interview with me, and just to let you know that there's solidarity throughout the world for the struggle and the Communist Party in Kenya. I'm available anytime to continue to follow up with you, to continue monitoring the movement, and if in addition, if the CPK would like to contribute anything in writing or anything ever to our journal and what we're doing in the US, there's always a desire for collaboration and solidarity. But before closing out, I just want to ask if you have any last things to say, and anything else you forgot to mention.
No, we feel very warm to hear that there are, people who believe that this struggle has a destiny, that the struggle for the liberation of mankind has to continue. So that makes our heart very warm. And my encouragement to my brothers and sisters and my comrades in the United States is to tell them that the same way we are looking for our economy to be organized, to be social, our struggle also has to be organized and social, because the big problem I see in Western the United States, progressive and revolutionary organizations, is subjectivism, individualism, and they are thinking they can fight it alone. It is not possible, because it is not your struggle. It's not a struggle for Joseph to win. It is a struggle for all of us to win. And as Lenin would say, to start a party of the new type, you don't need the masses first. You just need 3 or 4 people to be clear on what they want to advance. Then you can see the nucleus starts to grow. I think when we opted to advance now to organize primarily as a Communist Party of Kenya, in the Central Committee that started off as barely 3 people, now has expanded to as a nation, a national movement. In that way, my encouragement to the students and to you particularly is that philosophy is about debates, and it's a battle of ideas. And at the philosophical space, I think the battle of ideas is between 2 ideological thoughts. We have metaphysics and idealism on one side, and we have materialism on the other side. There are people who say that we can get knowledge away from science or through whatever reason. There are people who say we got ideas in our head, or ideas drop from heaven, or such crazy things. But there are people from, on the side of materialism that continue to advance that the philosophical thinking has to be, informed by sciences and not any other, even though we have been accused of scientism or, reductionist approach. But I think we can never use philosophy only to justify theology and abstracts like God and all that kind of thing.
Right.
We can use philosophy to advance humanity. And as a philosophy student, I wish you well, and I hope to see a Marx in you, the young Marx.
Thanks so much, and I'll be sure to share our writings, and all the best to you, comrade, and solidarity for the struggle in Kenya.
Okay, no problem. Bye-bye, comrade. And you could, are you going to publish this in a journal? You're going to transcript it?
Yeah, so we're going to transcribe it and publish it. We may also publish and do like a podcast as well, and kind of send you the final transcript before we publish it, so you can look through it and see that it's to your liking, so we can publish it for the journal. The journal will be we're still in the process of writing, collecting interviews, so probably will be published we do twice annually, so around June, and then there will be another in winter, so in December.
Okay, that's good. If you share with me also the podcast, I could be able to share it on our social media as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I will do that for sure. All right. Thank you so much. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hao wengine wametupima tu sana, kazi zao zote wakuzifanya. Tukikula mfupa kula nyama, vitambejia ile ganji wametunyang'anya.
Vijana wote situko na buka, vako zetu zote anazita mbua. 22 ni endo tunachagua, juma shida zetu hawezi kuruka. Msiwai tense mawera zita kuwa, team CPK hatunaga tupupa. Tuna kamsla hawezi kutuchuja, hao wengine watoi buka ndio buda.